Hello, and welcome to How Driver Pulse makes it easier to communicate and connect with drivers. We know you guys are all busy out there, so we really appreciate you carving some time out for us today. My name is Leah Kelly, and I'm here with Tenstreet CEO Tim Crawford and Account Manager Paige Day. We're excited to share the latest news about Driver Pulse, our driver-facing mobile app, and show you what a powerful tool it is for engaging your drivers. So before we get started, just the regular kind of things, this webinar will be recorded and it will be emailed to you tomorrow around the same time. And second, if you have any questions at all at any time, just go ahead and please put them into the questions box in the GoToWebinar panel. We'll be answering all of those, as well as many as we can get to at the end of the webinar during the Q&A section.
Great. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. And
I'm sorry. I was going to go through the agenda and then pass it over to you.
Okay, great.
My laptop just got jammed up, but anyway, so just really briefly before I do pass it to Tim, we're going to cover this today. We're going to talk about, or Tim's going to tell us a little bit about why Driver Pulse and show us some user statistics, the most recent user stats on the app. And then we're going to pass it over to Paige, and she's going to talk more about the functionality. So the messaging, video chat, documents in Pulse, how you can schedule training, driver-facing checklists, what those are, how to use them, and broadcasts as well. And then we're going to give it back over to Tim, who's going to kind of tie it all together and talk about what problem we're trying to solve, and then introduce our latest and greatest feature in Driver Pulse, which is application transparency. And then we'll take your questions. So I'll pass it over to you, Tim.
Hey, great. Thanks, Leah. And add my thanks to everybody for joining. We're going to try to move relatively quickly this afternoon and try to be respectful of time, but certainly want to make sure that you get as much out of this as possible. So if there's things that we're not covering, please put those in the questions section and we'll get to as many of them as we can at the end. And so first, let me just kind of dive in. Why is Driver Pulse? Why do we think it's relevant to carriers? And the answer to that question, right, is in that we believe that Driver Pulse is a really important tool that more and more drivers are using. And it's a great platform for carriers to use to engage with drivers and engage with candidates in a really, really meaningful way. Right? And so the numbers on the screen here are pretty self-explanatory and we're going to drill into them. But I think the big takeaway here is that drivers absolutely vote with their feet, right? If there's drivers are bombarded with options to, hey, download this app, install this thing, come to this website, right? And they are really, really vigilant around if the app doesn't do a job for them or a website doesn't do a job for them and create value in their world, they're not going to come back to it, right? And they're not going to use it. And when we look at it, whether it's applications submitted or how many people are active in the app, how many people have been active in the app, recently over the last year, those sorts of things, what that tells us is that drivers are finding value in the platform. They're finding it's solving real world problems for them. And we're earning a place on their phone, if you will, right? And as a result of that, I think it makes sense for carriers to engage more and make sure that from the carrier side, you're getting as much out of that platform as is possible. So that's kind of why we're here and why we want to sort of touch base on, here's what we're seeing in the data, here's the things we're doing from a product perspective, and here's how to leverage and get the most out of the tool. Okay, so if you think about, so how many drivers are using the app? And so this chart here on the left shows just the number of monthly active users over the last 5 years. And with some noise around it, the trend is pretty clear, up and to the right, which is great. And I think this data, and most of the data that's in this deck, is through the end of the second quarter. We like to look at data quarterly to make sure things that are especially related to hiring, et cetera, are as complete as possible. And so the numbers for, the number of monthly active users this month will be probably closer to the 240 to 250,000 drivers active this month. And we're really, really proud of that, right? We think that is great validation that what we're doing really makes sense. The chart on the right shows, hey, how recent are drivers getting getting into the app, right? There's only people into the app, people who are just getting into the app for the first time. And the answer to that is no. What this shows is kind of cohorts by age, on a typical quarter for the second quarter of this year. And so you can see a little less than a quarter of those, I think it's about 23%, downloaded the app for the first time in the second quarter. A little bit more, hey, they're new users within the last year, more than a quarter, but less than a year. But then the biggest group, more than 50%, have been in the app and active for more than a year. Now, for those of you who joined us in Vegas for our user conference this past spring, I had a similar chart. And the interesting thing is that the difference, right, in the quarter, the fastest growing cohort in this chart are the users who've been in Pulse for more than a year. What that means is while all the pieces of the pie are growing, and the pie is growing as shown on the chart on the left, the group that's growing the fastest, both in absolute numbers and as a percentage, are the users who've been on the app for more than a year, right? Again, we're super focused on how do we create value over the long run for those drivers, right? And make Pulse a really valuable tool and earn a place on their phone. And this shows us, hey, we're clearly not where we want to be, but we're heading in the right direction. Right? And so, Pulse is the place to increasingly a great place for carriers and drivers to connect. And we think this data kind of shows that. Now, if you look at the next chart, it's like, hey, what are drivers doing on Pulse? And, when we started Pulse, the app was introduced in 2015, so it's been around a while. Pulse was originally envisioned as a tool to help drivers manage that recruiting process from after application submission through onboarding. That was the job. And we needed one more button on a screen because I didn't like the way the screen laid out. It looked like it was incomplete. We didn't really know what to make the button do. It was a visual thing for me. And so we said, hey, let's just put a button that says apply on there. And what we found was we didn't expect anybody to click on it. Right? If you think back, this is when the app was intended to pick up after the driver had applied. And what happened is people clicked on the button. People clicked on the button a lot. And that told us something, right? That we try to listen really intently to what drivers are telling us about their actions. And what it told us was, hey, people were looking to find a better way to find their next job and to apply. And so what this chart shows is this is the monthly breakout of jobs or of applications in three big categories. And just talking through them from a definitional perspective. On the top, the lightish taupe color is the things that come through Pulse Match, and that's the premium product, the price per application part of the job search. And that makes up maybe somewhere between a quarter and a third of the apps that come off of the Pulse platform. The next, the red bar, is the things that are in Pulse Jobs, where carriers or drivers are going out and they are searching for carriers either by name or by recommendations from other drivers. Right? And those first two categories, those are based on your active jobs. And so if you haven't looked at your active jobs definition in a while, it's probably a really good idea to see how you're presenting yourself to drivers, because obviously there's a lot of drivers and a lot of applications coming off of that job section in Pulse. And we think that's a great way to sort of introduce yourself to more people. And finally, the bottom one is what we call the follow-ons applications. And these are cases where a driver has already applied. They've already clicked the apply button. They're in your dashboard. You're talking to them, and then they come into Pulse, into the Pulse carrier detail screen is the technical name for it. And they go through and they say, hey, I'm going to apply again. I'm going to apply again. And that takes on a couple of different tenors, right? It can be, hey, I did a lead form on Monday. They can see your carrier, your company in Pulse, and they can go submit a full Intella app on Tuesday, right? That would count as what we call a follow-on application. But you can also have follow-on applications where a driver applied in January, didn't hire on with you, may not have hired on with anybody, and they come back 6 months later, 9 months later, are back in the job market and looking and go, hey, what happened to that company that I never went through with? And they'll come into Pulse and they'll submit what we're calling a follow-on application here, just kind of out of the blue. And it's kind of just like, it's a bit of a bluebird if you react to those things the right way, right? And so from a recruiting process, from a prioritization perspective, really encourage you guys to be on the lookout for those. They're going to have a referral code of Pulse_app would be the name. And because sometimes those are full-blown Intella apps that just kind of came in out of left field. You probably haven't spent any advertising dollars. They probably haven't talked to a recruiter. But it's a driver who's back on the market and is interested in talking to you as a carrier, right? And that's really, really valuable. Now, it's worth noting, right? If you think about Pulse as an application source, the concern that we hear sometimes is, Pulse is impacting the way drivers are, how often drivers get into the market. And we don't see that in the data, right? The average driver, you look across our platform, and this number has been fairly consistent over the years. The average driver gets into the market about twice a year, about once every 6 months. The average driver puts in an application, maybe not a full application, may just be a lead, right? They may just be testing the waters about every 6 months. Now, there's a really wide spread around that average, right? I'm sure when I talk to most carriers, a lot of them have stories of the driver who applies every week, right? Or the driver who applies every month. And you also have drivers that they only are going to look in the market once every 3 years or once every 5 years, right? But the average is about twice a year. For the drivers who are using Pulse, the number seems to be right about the same, right? Which intuitively just makes a lot of sense. Finding a place to submit your job application, it's just as easy to go to Google and type truck driving jobs, or to Indeed and type truck driving jobs, as it is to go to Pulse. And so, we're not seeing a lot of evidence, or really any evidence, to be frank, that what we're doing is changing sort of job searching behavior. What we're changing is we're reducing the amount of friction that those drivers have to go through as they get deeper into the process, which we think is valuable for everybody involved. So increasingly, if you look at this, Pulse is a great source of applications. Drivers are increasingly going to Pulse to find their next carrier and to manage their application process. And carriers that have the highest percentage of winning are really proactive and active on the Pulse platform and are engaging with those folks, and really encourage you guys to do the same thing. So if you look sort of on the next slide, what it looks at is we said, okay, we think it's effective, right? But let's just see how effective it really is, right? And so what we did is we said, okay, let's take all the drivers that have come through in the second quarter, right? All the drivers across the platform. And then we said, okay, let's use as a marker for, did that driver get engaged, right? As did the carrier run a background check on that driver? If the carrier didn't run a background check, either the driver was obviously disqualified, or probably just as likely, the driver kind of went into attempting contact, right? You can never get that driver to engage or submit a full application. But to run a background check, for the most part, you need a full Intel app, so you have all the FCRA authorizations and disclosures, right? And you probably, most carriers have talked to the driver to make sure at least nominally the driver's qualified and the driver's interested. We said, okay, what percentage of those guys, how does the different ways that carriers are communicating with drivers, how does that translate into engagement levels? And that's what this black bar shows here. It says, okay, of drivers that got a pulse message, right? So just a pulse message from a recruiter to a driver, about 45% of those ended up, getting a background check run on it. Compared to 30% and change off text, it's about 7% for the second quarter of the email. Neither is kind of a catch-all. Everything else is about 1 in 10 have a background check, and 17-18% kind of overall, sort of a little less than 1 in 5 have something, right? So clearly there's a self-selection bias in there, right? You're going to be more likely to send a pulse message to somebody that you think is going to be qualified, that you think would be interested in your job. But clearly there's a huge differential there between pulse and SMS when it comes to engagement. So then we took that and we said, that's really interesting. Wonder what else we can learn, right? So let's go look at, hey, what percentage of those drivers get hired? What happens to the hiring rate? And that's that red bar here. Hey, how of drivers that get a pulse message, what percentage across the platform for the second quarter, what percentage of those drivers got hired? And it was, 7.5%, for pulse, just shy of somewhere between 5.5% and 6% for text messages. Email is really, really low. And the overall hiring rate, is somewhere around, 2.6, 2.7% for the quarter, right? And so all these are platform averages. So your mileage is certainly going to vary off these depending on a whole bunch of decisions about how you recruit and how you source, et cetera. But I think that the real message here, what we took away is, hey, Pulse is really, really effective at getting drivers to engage and getting drivers hired, right? And I think that comes down to a couple of things. There's a driver self-selection, in that the drivers who are most serious about their job, most serious about their career, they're going to tend to be on Pulse, right? The other thing I think that happens is, it's difficult for your message to kind of break through the static, if you will, if it's SMS or if it's an email, right? If you send me a text message, it's going to be intermingled with, messages from my kids, messages from my wife and friends, messages, my DoorDash order or my, Amazon orders being shipped or what have you, right? If I get a message in Pulse, the entire environment is around, my job and my career, right? And so we think getting somebody in that place to when they go to respond, those are all the things on the screen are relevant relative to their career. I think as a direct line to saying, hey, why is Pulse more effective at getting drivers engaged and getting drivers hired? And so we think it is an invaluable tool. Part of the question that comes up, like, okay, well, how many drivers, have Pulse? How do you think about that? Well, and what we believe is about, in any given month, about 80% of the drivers on our platform have Pulse on their phone. And we know that because, or we believe that because when we are helping clients run drug and alcohol clearinghouse results, we will remind the driver if their request is still pending at the clearinghouse, via a Pulse push message. And about 80% of the time, we're able to communicate with those drivers via Pulse. Even if they haven't used Pulse for anything else during that hiring cycle. So it's a broadly adapted tool, and something that we are investing a lot of attention in to try to make sure that it continues to be compelling and we continue to earn our spot in that driver's phone. Got it. You know, and I think from here, I think let's pivot a little bit and let me bring Paige into the conversation, and Paige can walk through the specifics of kind of best practices of how to actually use and get the most out of Pulse from the express side of the house.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tim. And so my name is Paige. I'm an account manager here at Tenstreet. And we are going to start with this slide here that says communication works for those who work at it. And this just exemplifies how Tenstreet dedicates a substantial amount of time to developing new solutions for our clients. As Tim said, Pulse is an extremely effective tool, and it can be utilized throughout the life cycle of a driver during all of the stages: recruiting, onboarding, and hired. In the next 6 slides, I'm going to outline the best tools and functionality that exist in Pulse. These 6 methods are going to help you as a Tenstreet client leverage the power of Pulse and effectively use the app. And so starting with Pulse messaging. Pulse messaging is a method of communication available for all clients to use with any driver applicants who utilize Pulse. The functionality resides within the driver's profile in your dashboard, and the Pulse icon indicates if the driver has the app downloaded on their profile. So if you see that little Pulse icon with the message little emblem, that indicates that they are a Pulse user, and that indicates that you do have the ability to Pulse message with that applicant. Pulse messaging is a quick and easy way to get in touch with an applicant, especially when the recruiting process first starts. It's extremely effective. It's a great place to make arrangements for next steps like interviews and orientation. And all Pulse messages will be logged in the communications view window for you to reference and read back over whenever you need. And so next, another effective Pulse feature for the recruiting process is Pulse Video Chat. This is a new feature for Tenstreet clients. It is an awesome tool designed to be utilized, as I said, during the recruiting process. Pulse Video Chat is essentially FaceTime within the dashboard. Clients can utilize this functionality to communicate with any Pulse users from their Tenstreet system. You may have noticed the little camera icon that's appeared in the subject view of some of your driver applicants. That's the button that will open the window where you can Pulse video chat with your applicant. Within the window, you'll have the ability to call your applicant using Pulse video chat. You can also leave a message or call a coworker directly through your system. This method of communication makes for a more personal and engaging interaction with you and your driver applicant. And this is a great feature to use when introducing yourself as an applicant's recruiter or facilitating a virtual interview. Pulse Video Chat allows for you to do all of those things. Now, both Pulse Messaging and Pulse Video Chat are great features to use throughout the life cycle of the driver, but they're especially effective during the recruiting phase when you're trying to engage a driver and quickly make arrangements for next steps. Next, we'll talk about some of the effective features that can be used during the onboarding process, starting with Pulse Documents. Pulse Documents is a feature available again to all clients, and it can be used to request a Pulse user's personal documents. This functionality exists in the Documents button within the Pulse user's driver profile. So the Documents button, if you click into the Pulse Documents tab, that's where you can request these items. There is a list of multiple different items such as CDL, MedCard, Social Security card, and DOT physical, as well as many others listed in the dropdown, and you can even include a message when you send the request over to the Pulse user. When the documents are submitted back, the Tenstreet user can then review the item submitted and file it away in your driver's documents. This functionality provides a quick electronic way to collect a driver's personal documents prior to them even showing up on site. And so the next onboarding feature that Pulse facilitates is training. And so if you utilize Tenstreet's training library, you can assign onboarding tasks that can then be completed in the Pulse app. And so you can assign both forms as well as training modules for a driver to complete All of Tenstreet's training classes are designed and built to be completed easily on a phone in the Pulse app. They're actually designed to be mobile first. We know drivers are busy, and this functionality provides a quick way for them to complete digital paperwork as well as the training that you scheduled to them. As these tasks are completed in Pulse, the resulting documents are all again automatically filed away in the driver's profile in Tenstreet. Pulse allows for drivers to voluntarily complete training as well, in addition to what is assigned to them by a carrier. And so a driver can then store their training certificates in their Pulse app, and then they can share it with any carriers that they've applied to. The entire purpose of the ability to manage and complete tasks in Pulse is to expedite the onboarding process and enhance the experience for both the driver and the carrier by facilitating all of it in an electronic format. And so the next feature we'll talk about also falls in line with these onboarding features. And this is actually one of the most buzzed about features at Tenstreet's user conference in April. It's driver-facing checklists. If you're not familiar with checklists, this feature allows for internal tracking of tasks in your dashboard. So a carrier can have checklists set up in their system to track 3 different things: processes that have been run on a driver's profile, documents in their file, and then tags as well. In addition to using checklists for internal tracking, there's also the ability in your dashboard to turn on a feature called driver-facing checklists. This would give the Pulse user visibility to the document status in your dashboard, so they can have visibility to what's missing from their file. And so they can see outstanding tasks awaiting completion on their profile in the carrier system. It's a great way to include the driver as an active participant in their onboarding process and give them ownership over maintaining their documents and completing tasks. Checklists are a free feature that can be set up by your account manager. If you've never utilized checklists before, I highly recommend looking into this, as it is an extremely useful feature. Your account manager can assist you with setting up a checklist internally for your users to reference, and they can also guide you to how to turn on driver-facing checklists as well. Finally, we're going to talk about broadcast. So all the tools up until this point, we've talked about some effective recruiting features as well as some onboarding tools as well. Next, broadcast is, along with Pulse Video Chat, this is a brand new communication feature that was first presented at our user conference in April. Broadcast is a feature that facilitates an engaging and effective method of communication between you and your hired active drivers. This feature is strictly a communication tool for your fleet, where you can build a broadcast and then send it to a segment of your hired drivers. This tool complements Tenstreet's engagement and safety features, and it's included if you have either in your Tenstreet package. Making a broadcast is simple. You'll simply choose the segment of the hired drivers in your dashboard that you want to send a message to. Then you can record a short live video message or upload a pre-recorded message to send to all of them. Once sent, you can review past broadcasts and monitor interactions with your broadcast messages directly in the tool. Some use cases for this tool include terminal updates, pay changes, holiday messages, maintenance and safety reminders, as well as school announcements. And so broadcast concludes the overview of the 6 effective ways to utilize Pulse throughout the lifecycle of the driver. There are solutions for recruiting, onboarding, and hired phases of a driver's employment. And there are always new and exciting Pulse developments happening at Tenstreet, and now is no different. So next, Tim is going to present some of the awesome functionality that has recently gone live, and he'll give us a peek into the incredible things to look forward to in the future.
Hey, thanks, Paige. That was a great overview. So when you think about Pulse and you think about what problem we're trying to solve, and I think it's one of trying to be an effective connection layer between carriers and drivers, right? Trying to find the right ways to reduce that friction. And that applies, if we look at this next page, it applies sort of across the entire Tenstreet platform. If you think about kind of the life cycle of the platform, starting pre-recruitment advertising and marketing, whether that's job store or Facebook advertising or drip marketing, all the way through recruiting and processing, onboarding, and then safety and retention, kind of that whole piece. One of our core beliefs is that if we do our job correctly, the connection between those multiple services allows us to create value in ways that the services standalone can't, right? And if we don't see that connection, we haven't done our job, right? And we think Pulse is a really, really vital piece of that. And that's why you see in every part of the tool, every part of the platform, there's pieces that have a Pulse interaction. Whether that's, the ability for drivers to see the background checks that you're pulling on them in the recruiting platform, the ability to message their recruiter as they go through. Paige mentioned, driver-facing checklists. And I just want to emphasize that for just a minute. If you don't have driver-facing checklists turned on, I'd really, really encourage you to look at that functionality. Okay? If you think about it from a driver's perspective, they've got 4 or 5 to-dos from all the carriers that they're engaged with. And when a driver's engaged and seriously thinking about making a move, the numbers show that driver engages between 4 and 5 carriers. So it doesn't take long for 4 or 5 to-dos on 4 or 5 carriers to really, really add up, right? If you're using driver-facing checklists, it makes it easy for that driver to know what's on the driver's list and what's on your list and where they are in that process, right? It's so important to manage that, right? To make it your process as easy as possible for that driver to figure out what do they have next, right? I mentioned, the importance of reviewing your active jobs and your company profile, and making sure that the way you're presenting yourself to drivers, whether those things are visible on your Intel app or in Pulse, or whether you're just using it for your recruiters internally, make sure that those things reflect reality, right? And so you're putting your best foot forward and your most accurate, most timely foot forward, right? Onboarding, the same thing. What we see is that, hey, 75% of the onboarding tasks that we see get completed are getting completed on a mobile device. And just the reality is it's much more seamless in an app environment on their phone than it would be on the mobile browser. It just is. The integration with the camera is better. For document uploads, the completion of training is much smoother. The login process is much smoother, right? And think about, okay, how do those things fit together? On safety, hey, if you're using some of our safety solution, absolutely encourage you to look at in the Pulse control section of Express. One of the options is to turn on safety mode in Pulse, which makes it easier for drivers to find that next safety task, whether it's consuming post-hire training, interacting directly with their safety person via Pulse messaging or video chat, or uploading a copy of whether it's accident scene photos or a copy of their renewed CDL, right? Really, really powerful. And so, and throughout this process, right, we're trying to find ways to, hey, how do we get all the pieces to fit together in a way that individually they couldn't do, right? If you just think about those set of use cases, if you ask drivers to download a different app or go to a different website for all of those different use cases, what you'd find is the take rate would collectively get worse, right? No one driver, or very few one driver, is gonna interact with all those different sites. And so what happens you end up more and more people that you don't get a rich interaction with, right? By leveraging Pulse for all those things, we're able to leverage our big install base and leverage the fact that that one tool sort of helps that driver interact sort of throughout that life cycle. And we're continuing this path kind of going forward. We've got a couple of interesting things in the wings. You guys get a little bit of a sneak peek. We don't have anything to show visually, but I do have a second to describe it. One of the things we hear from carriers a lot is that driver referrals are an important part of their hiring process. And we also hear that it's really, really powerful for candidate drivers to talk with and interact with current drivers. if you're hiring for a dedicated position, it'd be great for that driver to talk to somebody already driving that route, right? So they can have that interaction about, hey, what is this job really like, right? That's a powerful recruiting tool for a lot of carriers, but it's hard to do at scale, right? It's hard to do safely in terms of giving out personal contact information. How do you make sure that's happening? How do you incent and reward the current drivers for taking their time to talk to these prospective drivers? So we're about to start beta testing a thing we call Pulse Ambassador, which allows current drivers to be deemed, quote, ambassadors for certain types of jobs, and then to connect with at certain candidates, right? That you say, hey, I want this driver. This is a great candidate. I'd love them to talk to Joe who drives this route. And then they can leverage the communication, both text, video, and voice communications in Pulse, right, to have those conversations. It's called Pulse Ambassador. If you have a process like that and would be interested in learning more, we'd love to talk to you about it. Reach out to your advisor. Send me an email, tim@tenstreet.com. We're just about to start that beta program. I think that'll probably start the week after Labor Day, if the holidays cooperate. We're really excited about that. The other thing we're doing is what's on the screen now is application transparency. It's a new feature in Pulse. And the way I like to think about it is you put yourself in the driver's shoes, and a driver went to truck school. The truck school sent his application to 5 carriers. He goes to work for carrier 2 of 5, drives for them for 18 months or so, and then goes back out and applies at another carrier. And then he's 3 or 4 years into his career as a driver. He's put his application in at 4 or 5 carriers, some of which have gone out of business. A couple others have been acquired, and they're have been absorbed into other companies. And as scarce as drivers are right now, carriers are pulling out all the stops and and trying to reach out to candidates or potential candidates about, hey, let me talk to you about my job. And the driver says, well, wait, how did you even get my data, right? If you think about that from the driver's perspective, it can be a little creepy. And we all get those messages that they're just off-putting. How did you get my data, and how can I control it, right? And so we put together this feature called Application Transparency, and it's visible in Pulse, and it basically shows every application that we've gotten for every driver since day 1 of Tenstreet, right? Whether the application was a lead, whether that application was a phone application, whether it came from a company who's now out of business, right? We're going to show all those things, including transfers from third-party recruiters, transfers from schools and that work on the Tenstreet platform, right? As much data as we absolutely can show. It's 100% transparent. So drivers know, oh, how did you get my data? I know exactly how you got my data. I can actually see it. You can actually drill in and understand how that works, okay? That's part 1. Part 2 are these buttons here on the right where it says email and text and Pulse. It gives a driver a very clear way to indicate, an opt-in or out to indicate, yeah, I'm interested in receiving messages from this carrier or not, and can kind of pull those out, right? We introduced this feature earlier this summer. It's being used by thousands of drivers each week to kind of tailor and control how they get contacted and who gives them visibility as to who has their data, right, and how they got it. So we think it's really, really clear, and it's part of our process to both make a tool useful for drivers, but also we think really useful for carriers, and that's a little bit counterintuitive if you think about it, right? Sometimes carriers will ask us, well, why are you making it easier for a driver to opt out of communications from me? And in the kind of the unsugar-coated reality is, hey, look, if a driver doesn't want to get your text message, the driver's really, really unlikely to ever come drive for you. And the sooner you get that message as a carrier, the more your effort you can put on the drivers that are most interested in driving for you, right? You know, half the drivers that put a lead app into the market, half the drivers in any given month that put a lead app in the market do a full app with anybody. And so while response time is super important, it's also super important to be able to say, hey, look, know who to not spend time on, right? Which is really, really critical, right? And so that's really the why, what we did, why we built this feature, right? Driver visibility, driver control, and being able to make it clear, send clear signals as to who they're most interested in driving for in the future, right? Which we think, you know, just gets friction out of the marketplace and allows people to focus on the things that can happen instead of spending time on dead ends, which we think is really a good thing ultimately. Okay, so that's application transparency. You know, so the next time you hear a driver say, hey, how did you get my application? Where did my data, you know, where, you know, my identity's been hacked, somebody's been stolen my application. Encourage them to go to that. It's right on the homepage of Pulse, how did my data get here, right? And it's got complete transparency for the driver of how things got to where they are. The other big takeaway from a carrier's perspective, if you are not 100% buttoned up on your consents, especially around text messages, really, really encourage you to make sure, especially if you're using sort of a one-off text service that you upload a CSV and you send text messages, that you have a really tight process to make sure you're managing opt-outs and you're not sending text messages to people that either don't want to hear from you or that have opted out and maybe opted out on a, you know, a different channel. It's a really murky part of the law, but if you end up on the wrong side of it, it could be a really, really expensive mistake. Okay. And I think that kind of, you know, takes care of sort of the official materials. But if we have any questions, Leah, we're happy to take as many questions as we have time for, and still gives people back the balance of their afternoon.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you, Paige. You guys did a great job. That was so informative. I am taking questions now. So if you have any at this point, you just decided to wait until the end, that's totally okay. Let's go ahead and start asking them. I can see a few in the chat right now. Somebody had seen on one of the graphs about pulse match, and they wanted to know what pulse match was.
Yeah, pulse match is our a way to get the jobs that are the best fit for the carrier, best fit for the driver, most visible to drivers who are actively seeking jobs, right? And so, you know, the really awful line is that we call it pulse match because pulse Tinder doesn't roll off the tongue quite so well, right? And so the idea is that as a carrier, you can opt to go in and say, hey, I want to have, I want to get this job prominently placed in the Pulse job section. And we're going to only show it to drivers that are in that geography that have the appropriate type of experience. And then when the driver goes in and looks, those are at the top of the list, and drivers are able to submit apps from there.
Great. And if you are interested in something like that, you can reach out to your advisor who can give you some more information too. So if somebody hasn't started with Pulse yet, they've not done anything, they don't have it turned on, their drivers aren't using it, they've never heard of it, what is the best way to get started? What's the first step on that path?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple of things. One, all primary users, you know, first of all, the whole Pulse platform is free to carriers. right? With all the basics, everything other than pulse match is totally free functionality. It just comes with Express. All primary users have access to a tool called Pulse Control. And your advisor, account manager can help walk you through it or answer any questions, but that's the tool where you can go in, make sure Pulse is turned on, and control a whole bunch of settings about how you appear and what's visible in your Pulse experience for your candidates and your drivers, right? I mentioned safety mode, I mentioned driver checklists, I mentioned sharing background checks. All those things are controlled in Pulse Control. You've got a lot of ability to change how Pulse works when drivers get to your connection. That would be the first thing. And the second thing would be to make sure that you are engaging on Pulse messages. We see every month a fair number of drivers will send an inbound Pulse message to carriers that just never ever get replied to. When a driver sends a Pulse message, that is a really, really good proxy for drivers who are super motivated. Doesn't mean every one of those drivers who fills out a Pulse message is a perfect fit for your company. Not saying that, but engaging with drivers via Pulse messaging is really, really powerful, and that would be sort of a great place to start. If you click on that Pulse icon in the big white box in the subject view, you can see all sorts of details in there and gets at a lot of functionality, whether it's documents that driver has shared, as well as messaging, et cetera. So that would be kind of Pulse 101, if you will.
And do you need a release for Pulse messages? I think we have a question here about that.
For Pulse messages, you do not need a release. Where you need to be really, really careful about a release and an opt-in is under SMS. SMS messages, because they go across the public phone network, and because anybody who has your 10-digit number, in theory, can send you a message, technically, there's all sorts of rules around what has to happen for you to make sure that you're safely sending messages and sending messages in a compliant way. If somebody doesn't want your Pulse messages, they can block you inside Pulse, right, which through app transparency, or they can go through, and if they really didn't want to hear from you, they could just uninstall the Pulse app, right? So that's that messaging channel doesn't have the requirements for the opt-ins. They've effectively opted in by downloading and installing the app, but that's all you need on that front.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what would be the view for a recruiter for somebody who's opted out of all their communications?
You can, and I don't know if we have a screenshot of it in the deck. If somebody has opted out, it's going to be visible under the and Paige may help me here. It's like the subscriptions view in the communications or subscriptions tab.
Correct.
Communications view.
Yes. Right? So within the driver's profile, if you open it up and it's on app view, you'll change that button over to communications view. Within communications view, there's a great tab labeled subscription, and that's going to show you the forms of communication that a driver has opted in or out of. It's really easy. There's a little stoplight grid there that lets you know which are their preferred methods for communication.
Perfect. Okay, here's one about video chat. This person's wondering if there's a way to have a pre-recorded kind of quick video messages that other users can access that are kind of pre-recorded in their uniform, and that way one person can record them and then their whole team can use them as they see fit when appropriate.
And I think the answer to that is yes. You have the ability to live record, but you also have the ability to upload a video for the quick message, the pre-recorded messages. So you'd have to just share that video file around, and the appropriate users could upload it to their account inside the dashboard. The one thing that we would kind of encourage you is, we think there's an analogy with a with email messages. What we see is that the more professional looking an email message looks, the lower the response rate is. If you view the video message and you're putting a lot of time and energy into production values, for lack of a better word, its shelf life with drivers is going to be relatively low. Drivers are going to start ignoring it relatively quickly. And so while you can do an upload, would want to encourage you to be really thoughtful about how you do that. We see that consistently the best responses come out of a messaging channel that are the closest you can get to being an individual message from one person to another. But I think that the technical ability is still there. And Paige, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
No, I think that's a great point. I think you answered that thoroughly.
Okay, great.
So broadcasting and as well as Pulse chat, this is the question, will they only go through the Pulse app, or can you also email and text the drivers these videos?
They will only go through they will only go to Pulse. Now, if the driver is using the Pulse website, because there is the Pulse app and there's also the Pulse web, they will have the ability to log into the Pulse website and see that. It just tends to have not the same response rate because one of the things that the Pulse app brings us is the ability to send a push notification, which tends to be a lot more effective than all the other way we get people to the Pulse web. So it's available, but it tends to be more effective for people using the app.
Okay, great. And so how about a driver who has not submitted an application? Are they still able to send a recruiter or a processor a Pulse message?
In today's world, if they haven't sent an application, the driver is not able to send a message initially. They would have to, because there's not a connection between that driver and that carrier. It's right. One of the things we're looking at adding and trying to figure out the right way of doing it inside Express, since there's not, if you think about everything in Pulse is sort of hanging off of a white box and a subject being in a work list and assigned to a recruiter, those sorts of things. None of those structures exist for drivers that haven't applied yet, and trying to figure out the right way of doing it. So it's something that we're thinking about, but we don't have a really clear path forward on it yet. But so today's world, they have to have applied.
Okay, and I think we answered this one earlier, a little bit earlier, but the second part to that question was, where does the message go in Tenstreet, or do I have to have the app?
Yeah, it will actually go into the communications view inside a subject view.
Right. So this app is just for drivers to communicate with carriers through your Express dashboard, and that's how you would communicate it back with them through Express, and then the driver would contact you back through the app.
That's exactly right. And the driver can communicate with you can have assigned and visible through Pulse both the processor and as well as a recruiter. And for clients using our safety mode, you can have two additional primary contacts. It probably doesn't make sense if you're using Pulse to manage submitting updated documents for a DQF or post-hire training or attending safety meetings, that sort of thing. They can actually, the driver's messages, instead of going to the recruiter, would go to, say, to the appropriate person in safety, that kind of thing.
Okay. And Paige, do you see any more questions? I didn't know if you were looking at these with me. I just wanted to, I think we're at the end and we were going to be able to give people a little bit of their time back.
No, so I think that all the questions were answered. Just to add to a couple, with Pulse messaging, you would respond to that from your dashboard, but there is also a Tenstreet mobile dashboard app that you can utilize for that as well. So if you're wanting to be able to manage that on your phone, you can download the Tenstreet Dashboard mobile app. And then Tim, just to build on that question about receiving Pulse video chat through Pulse and Broadcast. Broadcast is designed for your hired drivers, so it can go through Pulse or through an email. And so you can utilize that through both, but correct, Pulse video chat is only Pulse. So
Yep, that's 100% correct. Thank you. Yep.
Okay, good. Well, if anybody does have any other questions, please do feel free to reach out. You can either reach out back to your advisor, your account manager, your salesperson, whoever you would like to. We'll get you the answers that you need. Just wanted to say thank you again for everybody for joining us for this hour. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you again, Tim. Thank you, Paige.
Thanks, everybody. I hope everybody has a great day.
thank you all.